the speed of change is super fast and it's exponentially speeding up. While I don't want to criticize traditional organization development and design approaches, I have to highlight that, like you see, Lalu also says that every time humanity shifts to a new stage of consciousness, we also reinvent a radically new way of working together. And what happens is that our current practices, especially in organization development and design, are still very strongly rooted from the industrial era, when we look at organizations as machines and we try to optimize them, we try to change elements of them, or when we think they are not functioning well, we try to restructure them. So there is a lot of structured, focused organization development and design happening in the world. The other thing that's also coming in is that looking at organizations not as a machine, but as living systems, nothing new, but we tend to forget this, or again, traditional approaches tend to forget this. Organizations are living systems because the smallest particle that's creating them is us, the living human beings. So the systems we create are also living systems. I like using Isaac Adizeshi's life cycle model because it so nicely reminds us that every organization, in fact, every product and service has its life cycle model, and how we organize ourselves around work at each phase is very different. But in each phase, we learn something super important that enables us to get into the next phase, just like in our own life. Yet, traditional org design and org development approaches tend to focus on the ideal, how a company should work like, not necessarily taking into consideration that it's maybe just a growing company, still trying to find its market, fit to market things, or that it's maybe an already aging organization and they are trying to revitalize them. It's like telling to a, I don't know, 60, 70-year-old person that now act like a 45-year-old one. It's not working, yeah? So taking into consideration the maturity of the products and the services is becoming a super important part of our work. And every time a company shifts to a new stage in its own maturity, or around every product and service, and our SAP friends here probably know a lot about this, when each of your product is at different maturity, then you can't organize around the work the same way. Yeah? So taking that into consideration. So we've been looking for a long time for a new definition because the traditional definitions of organization development and design seemed very project-based, very much coming from the top-down approach, and there are other approaches as well. And the more we looked and the more we tried to grasp what is going on actually when we are working together with organizations, looking at them as living systems, supporting them in their own evolution, we've actually came to a conclusion that we don't design organizations. Every organization has a design at any given moment, and that is nothing else than the set of valid, explicit or implicit agreements about what is the work that we need to do now and how are we going to do it. And the other aspect of it, and I'll go into more details on that, but if we really, really want to simplify, these are the two questions we should constantly talk about in organizations. What is the work we need to do right now and how are we going to do it? And then who does the development of the organizations? In both the traditional definitions of org design and org development, it seems that there is an external consultant involved who is facilitating or doing or project managing the project. I worked in a large organization also, and many of you also did, so you probably also realize that we are all doing this. All the people who are working in the organization, we are all constantly making agreements about what is the work that we need to do now and how are we going to do that. So when we are making new agreements, then we are developing the organization. So it's in our understanding all about the agreements. And of course, when we talk about the agreements, it's important to structure it further. And we use also from the people from the organization design background, they also come, they will know this, yeah, J. Galbraith star model. These are the topics that we are making agreements about in every organization. So these are not things. The people are making the agreements about these topics. And you'll see that there is a slight adjustment to those who are familiar with the Galbraith model, because what we also notice is that strategy is not really a constant anymore. It's changing so fast that we need something where we can kind of anchor our organization to, and that is purpose. So we added the purpose to the model. Another little change, which is a little change, but a big one, is that even though Galbraith's model was never meant to be kind of a steps to follow, we know that we humans have this tendency that we do that. So way too often, organizations, when they are finally done with a new strategy, then they used to start walking around the Galbraith model. And what was the next step? Structure. So we had a set strategy. Let's create a new structure. Let's reorganize. Let's restructure. And you probably see that this is most of the requests that are coming in if you are org design. And this is what most of the organizations are currently doing. Why? Because the environment is changing, so their strategy is changing if they are trying to be adaptable. But you don't necessarily have to change the structure of the organization. I'll come back to that. So we say it's a lot more important to talk about the value creating processes first, and talking about the parts that is way too often implicit agreements about our management processes or about our governance. We have to make decisions about that. How do we want to make decisions before we start building a structure? Because once you build a hierarchical structure, then it's very difficult to start creating decision making that is close to your clients. Yeah. So therefore, we say first we make agreements about the value creating processes, how they are changing, what kind of governance model we want to use, and then we have a look at the structure, which is basically how do we group work around the value creating processes. We make agreements about what behavior we want to reinforce in an organization and what sort of people skills and how we are developing our own people so that we can fulfill these agreements. This is really, I'm staying high level on this. But you see why we like the Galbraith model, and here is where I'm going to connect it back to organization development. Because these agreements that we either explicitly or implicitly make about these topics will influence how people behave in organizations. And how people behave in organizations is actually the culture of the organization, and it will define the performance of the organization. And currently, you probably have lots of requests of making companies more efficient, more speedy, involving AI into them. This is all, of course, related to the culture and the performance as well. And what you see here is that those things are actually connecting back to your purpose. So if you make the right agreements, if they are aligned with each other, then the company will perform the activity that fulfills its purpose in a way that it's aligned with its purpose, so the values are aligned with the purpose of the organization. And then here comes the solution focused part. So for those of you who are at home with it, just bear with me, because for those who are not, and I remember also when I first time met with it 15, 20 years ago, how mind-blowingly new this was. Because in all the consultancy work, we are drilled to think that we have to do a diagnosis before we touch anything. And this approach comes from the family therapy. In the coaching world, there are thousands of people all around the world using it. And we know we don't have to understand the problem to help the person, a team, or a whole system, in this case, an organization, to define its preferred future, to choose a future that's out of the uncountable number of possibilities. And especially in a case of an organization, choosing this future is not the job of the CEO or the management. The more people you involve into this defining the preferred future, we start with the end in mind, the more likely they start making an agreement about this preferred future. So the more likely they already agree in the direction. So they don't have to make lots of agreements, and we can avoid lots of conflicts based on this. This approach also says that it's not just about finding a solution. As you see, we're not even going to look for the problem and its solution. We're actually focusing on the resources that the person, the team, or in this case, the organization already collected. And we help reminding the organization of these resources so that they can build confidence to make the step towards their preferred future, which is the evolution. And the third dimension, which we use constantly in our work, is the future is now. And it's coming from the notion that change is not linear, but rather more spiral. So every time when we finally decide what is our shared preferred future, the direction we are heading to, we should start having a look at what is already here from this. Because there is always something here from it. But usually, especially in the case of organizations, oh, sorry, I just wanted to check the chat thing also. In the case of organization, what happens is that there are things already there flying under the radar. When you talk about agile transformations, they were always in whichever company we work with, they already had some people who were experimenting with things. Today, the biggest topic is bringing AI into the organization. If you look around, people are already using it. So why to start inventing something when you can start building on what is already there? Yep. So these are the three most important aspects of it. Of course, again, I'm staying very high level, and there are thousands of fine little details and nuances how the solution-focused approach works. But maybe I move on, to the process. So how does solution-focused organization development and design look like? And again, this is a very high-level process that you see, and it's only a process for the sake of teaching. Because when we are working with organizations or within organizations, it's actually very clear that it's not that you once covered your strategic design phase and then you move into the detailed design like in a linear process and then you're done. There are people who should be spending lots of time and continuously spending time on strategic design questions nowadays if an organization wants to really be responsive to all the changes that are happening in the environment. And they should also look after the harmonizing efforts of the lots of detailed design that they are going into the same direction. But where I want to go today, focusing on the two things that are very different in these processes compared to traditional org design and org development processes. And that's the beginning of it. So I already said that we don't diagnose, but then you could ask, okay, but then what the hell you do, yeah? Or how do you know what to work on and what to work with? And this first phase, instead of diagnosis, is what we call contracting, but it's misleadingly does not mean the external consultant contracting with the organization. What it means is two things, and I want to kind of zoom in a little bit into both things. The first thing is that instead of the diagnosis, we ask thousands of questions about why do you want to change anything at all? It's the purpose of the change. What is it that you would like to have, create, instead of what is now? How would it look like when your organization evolves to its next level? Which means that all the problems of the current state, we treat more like in holacracy, attention that is a sign that the organization is not doing things aligned with its purpose. And when we ask these questions, so we contract for the preferred future, we get to hear the opposites of the current problems, and more. And this is why this brings more onto the table, talking about what they would like to have instead of what there is now, because we get a lot more dimensions of this preferred future than just the antidotes of the current problem. What this also means is that with our approach, it's our job and responsibility that, of course, your client is going to call you when there is a problem. And it's our job to help them widen their horizon and understand that they are coming from somewhere, that they already have a lot of resources, and to define together where they would like to go instead of what they would like to have instead of what they have right now. How would it look like? How would you notice? And I'm putting here these questions, especially for those of you who are not working yet with the solution-focused approach, because here what we are doing is actually we're trying to involve not in one conversation, but in the series of conversation, more and more people to talk about this preferred future. So even if the organization can only imagine it top down, what we do is we start creating these top-down conversations, and the more people you involve, the more details they're going to add to this picture. So they are already agreeing on how the end would look like if this process, intervention, whatever we call project, would be successful. Which means they are making agreements already, right at the beginning of our process. Which also means another thing. We're not diagnosing and then telling them to trust the process, and at the end there will be something good coming out of it. This creates measurable success criteria, visible ones, KPIs of the process that you can measure. So how are we all going to know that we got there? Which is again another layer of the agreements that they already quantifying, qualifying this outcome. So we're not contracting on fixing the current problems, but we really are there to help the company to evolve to the next level. And not only that, because the other thing the solution-focused approach enables is that we're actually working with very minimalistic tools and repeating often the same tools, which it results that the organization, the system, easily learns the way how we are going about in these conversations, which also means that they are learning how to create these conversations for themselves for the next time. And what this creates is actually very fast processes. So all the time we would have spent on the diagnosis, we already, by the end of that time, we already have a very clear agreement description of the direction where the organization goes. And I have thousands of stories about this when organizations, for example, made these conversations, they agreed on how is, for example, the end of the next year going to look like and what they are going to celebrate. And then they wanted to implement the objective and key result system, and they did. And then they messed it up and they were so worried what's going to happen now. And then I just asked them, hey, and how are you doing on reaching your success criteria? And they realized that in August already they knew that 98% is already reached from their targets. So because they spent so much time in defining how the end is going to look like, they could not make it happen. Yeah. So therefore, we don't have to rely on that many structural things, because these agreements are pulling the organization into the direction they defined for themselves. Now, we're not leaving anything to just maybe it will happen or won't happen. So the other part we spend a lot of time on in the beginning, before kind of starting the process, is designing the design process. How are we going to work on this together? And questioning if it should come top down or who should be involved. And for that, I also have a few slides I would like to show to you, and then I let you also ask some questions. Because we're also trying to help organizations to see themselves not just in their formal and informal structure, which they are usually aware of, but shedding light to their value creating structure, which is where work is actually being done. This is where people around processes, around products, or around current goals team up, work together, quite often sitting in different silos of the organization, not even knowing that they are one team. So a lot of work and a lot of emphasis we put actually on the value creating structure. Because remember, our definition question is also, what is the work we have to do now and how we are going to do it? And that, the quickest answer to that you can give in the value creating reality. You don't necessarily have to restructure the organization. Just make sure that you create the right groups, projects, working groups, circles, product-based operating models, name them however you name them, whatever fits the organization, that are where people are organized around the current goals or the current priorities, which also allows us to leave people sitting in their formal structure without restructuring, which again shortens the process, lessens the identity crisis that comes with restructurings. Again, I have tons of stories about this, but I'm moving on. You see on this slide something else. Legal structure, I'm not getting into it. It's not, an organization is not a sum of its employees. XY, what is it? It's my favorite McGregor theory, X theory Y. It's such an old concept, and we have a lot more newer ones like Carol Dweck's fixed mindset, growth mindset, but this fits so nicely in my 20 years of experience. What I have seen that in organizations where the X mindset rules, where we basically just say that people don't believe that other people are motivated to do their work and can feel responsible for that, they tend to see the organization more in their formal structure. So there is lack of trust towards the people and the system. Therefore, they tend to try to answer to every problem with a structural or restructuring answer. The more trust there is in an organization, the more likely they see the value creating reality of the organization and the colorful legal structure of the organization. And the more likely they are not stuck in the structure-based evolution. Why is this important, and why am I talking so much about this? Because what kind of process we design, that will define what will the outcome of this whole process. So the more X mindset is the organization, the more it sees itself in the structure, the more it's going to think that the only way to change anything is an expert comes and an expert decides, whether it's an external one or whether it's you who they hire to come inside and be the expert to draw them the new structure, for example. And these approaches will always be structure focused. Yeah. The more we move towards the why, so when there is more trust, then you get the management-driven processes, and both of these require tons of change management. So a small group of people decide, redesign, and then we have to sell it to the rest of the organization. The thing with these, and here comes my criticism towards these worked when we could plan for 10, 15 years. Today, so then you could waste 1.5 years to restructure, redesign, and change manage into the new way of working. Today, when, like Anne said, they need a solution by the end of December. This is too slow. Yeah. So we're moving towards, if there is more trust, they're more likely to involve people from the organization. And the more trust there is, the more we're actually getting to the methodologies or the ways of how change is imagined, that there's a continuous evolution, constant fine-tuning, where there are no big transformation, no need for big transformations, because the organization constantly fine-tunes its way of operating around the current goals and the current priorities. Now, why am I showing this to you? Because, of course, we also need to know that you can't go to an organization where there is a lack of trust and say, oh, but there are these wonderful large group methodologies. Come and let's involve everyone, and we do a wonderful open space world cafe, whole scale change. Because they're going to look at you like, are you okay or not? I mean, isn't that your job to tell us what to do? So the point that we're also covering, I'm covering in my book and on our course, is also how to design processes where you start where they are, but you make sure that on the go, you bring them closer to the mindset that is needed for their preferred future. So it's not our ultimate goal to make everyone a Y mindseted person, just enough mindset change, and the mindset changes via experience, not via training. And in that experience, you have to create a process that, for example, the leaders can experience the cleverness or the resourcefulness of their own people, so that you can ensure that next time they can involve more and more people. I have 2 examples for this. And sorry, I'm just running through this and then we do some questions. One is an HR, many of you from HR, so I thought I'll bring an HR example. HR portfolio redesign. HR is doing the traditional old usual HR services, and the company has all gone agile for years now, and there's a lot of criticism for HR, what they are doing and how they are doing. So there is a new HR, head of HR, they changed the head of it. And there is a requirement or a call for proposals to redesign. It's a 15 member HR unit, so it's not a giant organization. You can imagine, I think, around 600 people. How long do you think it could take to redesign all day processes? Just a wild guess. You can write it in the chat or shout it in, and I try to have a look at the chat while I'm talking. I can't read. So what would be your guess? How long would it take?
There are some questions in the chat, and I tried to answer on the spot. We will have to retake them.
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
You're not scared if you see the amount of stuff in the chat so far.
So, just wild guess. Come on, somebody just say something. How long do you think? How long would it take to you to take them through that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question, and maybe it's my hearing. How long does it take what?
To redesign all their services, the whole portfolio of HR, all the services from employer branding.
To redesign what? The whole?
Their service, what they are doing and how they are doing it. Because the company is not happy with the service.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, because it takes indeed, well, you can redesign, but the implementation, we're talking about organizational design and development, so I agree, it can take years, but I would say, yeah, minimum 18 months, I guess, to redesign.
Yeah. So here's, again, just very briefly to show you, this was my offer to them. The initial call for proposal called for somebody to design it for them, and they will do it. I think I won the job because I promised them that we can do it in 6 weeks. And we actually did it in 6 weeks, and I did not design anything for them rather than the process where, and this is why I wanted to talk about the mindset a little bit, where the leader initially did not believe that any of the people in her team could come up with solutions that would be good enough for the business leaders. So first, I had to do a bit of a review, then I reported it back to her, but I said, hey, why don't we invite, it was actually not a review. I asked the clients, the business leaders and the people who are working at the organization, how is their work changing and how could HR better support them? A very solution-focused question. And I said, hey, I can share my findings with you, but why don't you invite your direct reports? It's 4 people, so all 5 of you will hear it, then you don't have to repeat it. So we're stretching the mindset. I'm sharing my findings, we're having these discussions, they're understanding what's happening. So we say, fine, so we will have to review you can see here all the processes, all the topics that they have to review as a result of it and redesign. And then my suggestion is, and who's going to be there on the 2-day, actually at the end, 4 times half-day workshop? Head of HR says, us 5, her and her direct reports. The direct reports say, hey, why don't we invite our people also? I'm constantly reinforcing that having 15 people is great. I can manage that. We'll have more ideas. And then really in 4 times half days online, they redesigned every single service, from what they do in employer branding, how the recruitment process looks like, how they're going to onboard people, so everything. And then it was ready, and I've put it into a document and delivered the document at the end that they asked for. Now, were they ready? They were not ready, but because they all designed it together, it required 0 change management. What it required from them is prioritize which processes they're going to start implementing right now. They can't change everything in one go. And then they started working on this in sprints. So you see, that's what I'm saying. It's mind-blowingly fast. Another one, just to show another example, starting an agile transformation. And some of you have heard this case because we had it already at the solution-focused circles. Of course, it does not mean that we've supported the whole company to go through an agile transformation. But at the company, the IT unit decided that they want to be the first ones to start this. They want to be the front runners. They have selected a group because I asked, who is already doing agile? Yeah, so we're not assuming nobody does. And guess what? We found 3 groups. They selected one, and I worked with them for 3 months. But in the beginning, we defined how are we going to know that you have started this agile transformation. And then in 3 months, we actually noticed at the end of the 3rd month that they are already acting like they described how they would act when they would be self-organizing, taking responsibility, managing the work, delivering on time, and the customers be happy. And of course, what I'm also saying here is that it's not the whole company, but here, this group of people gained so much confidence. They actually won an award at the end of the year. So 6 months later, they became the agile team of the country in Hungary. They gained so much confidence that they said, thank you, we don't need a consultant enough, because what we did here, we can repeat this with the other teams also. So they have the confidence to spread the approach further. So we're not just solving the issue, as I told you, but elevating them to the next level, and also handing over simplistic tools they can repeat with others, so they can be the champions in their own organization. And this is why we think that the challenge is actually not just how organization design will be an acknowledged profession, and you have to know that on continental Europe we're still working on that, while in the UK it's a well-established profession. But it's also the question, how will it transform into a competency in organizations, especially nowadays when organizations have to constantly rethink and constantly redesign themselves. So that's why we have the courses. So this is a little bit of showing it off. So we have 2 internationally accredited courses, the Native in Change course, which is our basic course, and then we even a Master in Change, a build-up course. This is what Irena also been through this whole journey for a while now. And you see, I could give you today some bites about our approach, but it really does take 10 days to learn it and understand it, how it works through cases. so that it becomes a skill and not just kind of a religion that I believe or I don't believe, but you get to see from small tools to large tools how to work with organizations. So we have 2 courses currently that are open. The Hungarian one is full, so we have a face-to-face course in Lucerne that we only have 2 places left. And we have the online course that we are running roughly parallel with the Lucerne course. And these are the courses that you get a 20% discount if you are interested to join to our next cohorts. It's all an accredited course, which means that it leads you also to the certification. You will get the slides, those of you who don't know it. So this covers your educational background, and then you have to collect the working hours to become a certified organization design professional. And there are the 2 books. As I told you, I wrote one and it became 2 because it became too long. And the first one is roughly covering our course, the first half of it. It's about how to support individuals and teams in these constant changes. And the second one is more about complex systems, so how to handle big transformations, maybe without big transformations, but support organizations in the revolution.